Probably trash trucks are out at other people's houses. You're on the list though, as soon as one gets out.
You win one, I win one.
Helps you procrastinate a little bit better. Like, I can't do anything about it, like. I think it's just to be getting one back.
Yeah.
Not tomorrow. I went there yesterday and it didn't look like it was done.
Going by now, it's still pretty good. Oh, pizza, Douglas?
Cancer survivor, so she tends to put away. She seems worthy of people that have lost their hair or something.
Oh, man.
It's also not the support group.
Yeah.
And they didn't have it?
Yeah. Well, she doesn't, she's not.
Not a lot of fighter. What?
Joy, did you tell Wendy to call in on the other line?
6599.
We're at the old think room.
Wendy, are you there?
No, she's a private contractor.
Well, at least it's okay.
I'm here.
All right, Wendy,
Awesome shirt.
just checking. Thank you.
Okay.
I just, you know what, sometimes they're so bad, they're good, that's good, full circle, that's kind of easy. That's just.
Okay, I think we're close enough here, or as close as we're going to get. I'm not sure if Councilman Brown, Member Brown, if we've heard anything from him.
I have not.
Okay, Councilmember Popcock said she may be a little late in joining us. So, with that, this afternoon, we have with us in the audience, Jay Stern, our federal lobbyist. And on the telephone, we have Wendy Chamberlain, who works for us at the state level. And both of them have some reports to provide on various issues at the respective levels. One common one is the port. And being Wendy is on the East Coast or somewhere quite a ways away from us, we're going to try to get through the presentations and come back, do a little adjusting in the schedule here so we can let her go. So the idea is we're going to start with Jay Stern, and Jay is going to give us a little update on what is going on specifically as he sees it with port activity. Then Wendy will follow that on relative to state and port activity. Then Wendy will give us just a couple other words on other items that nobody knows maybe what the final is at the legislature, like with the PFD and that type of stuff. We all heard about the PCE and where that was at, but she'll touch on that briefly. And then Jay will circle back around to talk about other opportunities that may be available in the infrastructure bill. And so at any point through the discussion, Jay does have a presentation, but both of these guys are pretty quick on, our guy and madam are quick on their feet. And I'm sure that if you you don't need to save your questions necessarily to the end, feel free to interrupt if that's okay with you, Jay.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
All right. And you want to just come up here somewhere. If it's more convenient for you to sit at the table, you can, or the podium will work too. Feel free to sit there.
It's all right with the council?
Yeah.
It's great to be up in Nome. I got up on Saturday, so I caught a little bit of the sunshine. And for some of you, I've met previous visits, and it's a privilege to represent the city of Nome. And My name is Jay Stern. I'm the president of a small lobbying shop in the DC area called Windward Strategies. Small enough that I work in the day and then sweep out the place at night. So it's just, but it gives me the flexibility to work with the clients that I really appreciate with. And as I said, it's been a real privilege to work for the community over the years. I want to start by saying a lot of what goes on in DC pales in comparison with how complex it is in Juneau. But from a distance, and we're about 4,300 miles away from DC, it's crazy. You can see stuff on the news, you can read things in the newspaper. But one thing that has really helped in the past couple of years is the Alaska congressional delegation. Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, and Congressman Don Young have all worked relatively well together in a really unified way to support the state. And when it comes to Nome, I feel like they have been very responsive to requests that we've made and really do look out for the city and for the region. I'm going to focus on the port project initially, and then after Wendy's presentation, talk a little bit more about some of the bigger infrastructure bills that are coming down the pike. But one of the things that Senator Murkowski really did was work on a bipartisan basis for the hard infrastructure bill. So that's 1.5 trillion. The numbers that I'm going to throw around tonight don't seem real. And in my 30 years of working in DC, I've never seen anything quite like this. But we're going to take advantage of it. If the money is going to be flowing out to the country and it's going to be flowing up to the state of Alaska, then I want to make sure that Nome is as well positioned as possible. Senator Sullivan has been instrumental in making sure that the Arctic Deep Draft Port project went through or has moved forward. Some of you may recall that when circumstances changed out in the Chukchi Sea, when Shell pulled out, the Army Corps put the project on pause. And it was really through Senator Sullivan's direct intervention with Army Corps leadership in headquarters in DC that they unpaused it, reoriented it toward the city and the region on a different basis. And then he really worked hard pushing through the Water Resources Development Act to get it authorized. Congressman Young, the congressman for all of Alaska, has pretty much had to do both, all of the above. Senator Murkowski is more on the appropriation side. Senator Sullivan is more on authorizing committees that really focus on some of these issues. But Mr. Young has always been there and has been very responsive as well. And sometimes what he does is not always front page news, but again, very responsive to when the city has asked for help. So I'll jump right into the Arctic Deep Draft Port. As I said, the pause on the feasibility study was incredibly frustrating. I remember getting a call from Senator Sullivan's staff one late afternoon, early evening, and the senator had just gotten off the phone with the number 2 general at the Army Corps headquarters, and he said, call the city's representative and then have him call the mayor, Mayor Benville at the time. And he said, and I quote, I just kicked the living shit out of General Semonite, and I think they're going to unpause the study. And delivered the message, and lo and behold, the feasibility study moved forward. Should also acknowledge the tireless efforts of the port director, who has been, I think, a cattle prod to the Alaska District for the Army Corps of Engineers. Incredibly prepared, keeps me on my toes. Once we got the feasibility study moving forward, the next step was to make sure that they actually did something with it. And that led to an Army Corps Chiefs Report, which is an incredibly important step in the process that essentially says the professionals at headquarters have looked at the details, the economics, at the design, at the need for the project, and blessed it. And once that report is signed, it has one more important step, and it has to be authorized by Congress. And that only really happens through the Water Resources Development Bill, which happens now approximately every 2 years. So we got the feasibility study, we got the Chiefs Report, we got the WRDA bill signed into law. And now where we are is in the preliminary engineering and design phase. So that's really a short version of about 6-7 years reorienting the feasibility study and making sure that Headquarters is paying attention. The Alaska District for the Army Corps didn't lose focus on this. We've had a Secretary of the Navy up here. We've had the Commandant of the Coast Guard. We've had the senators visit. There's a broad reason for why this port has been focused on by the Army Corps. It's the largest Army Corps project on the books in the state of Alaska at this point. And some of the key components in the feasibility study identified how important this port is as a regional hub for the region, supporting more than 50 communities. It also has the potential to protect the marine environment. And it also has been acknowledged by Congress and the Army Corps that it is a critical component for national security reasons. Does that mean that the Navy is going to steam in and set up a Navy base up here? Probably not. But the Coast Guard and the Navy, I think, have put enough thought and intellectual effort into it that we know it's very likely that they will utilize the port once it's built, and that they really do want it, even if they can't say all of that as much publicly as sometimes we would like them to. So I'm going to mention one specific part of the hard infrastructure bill before turning it over to Wendy, or answering any questions that you have at that point. Going back to Senator Murkowski, she was one of 5 Republican senators who sat at the table to negotiate and hammer out the hard infrastructure bill. And one of the key provisions in there from my perspective for the port project is $250 million linked specifically to the remote and subsistence harbor provision under the Water Resources Development Act. Why this is important is because that is the exact authority that the Army Corps used when it authorized a project, when they were looking at it for the chief's report. So $250 million is carved out for that specific statutory authority. It's primarily an authority that only applies to Alaska. Technically, it could apply to Hawaii. Technically, it could apply to other parts of the United States that have ports that are economically critical to a community or to a region, but they can't be connected to a road system. They can't be connected to a rail system. So it's pretty much an Alaskan provision. So we're pretty confident that that pot of money will be available for this project. It still has to go through the Alaska District of the Army Corps. They're the ones who will determine what funding gets allocated to what projects. It's not the only project that is on their books. And then, last thing I'll mention is that's a lot of money. It's a big project, but even with the Remote and Subsistence Harbor Authority and the potential funding that's being authorized and appropriated through the hard infrastructure bill, there'll still be local money, state money, combination, all of the above that needs to go into the project. So it's a good sign that we've authorized the project. It's an even better sign that Congress is paying enough attention and putting some real money into a piece of legislation that is likely to pass this month. And I'll go into some of the congressional dynamics a little bit later. So happy to answer any questions now or turn it over to Wendy.
Anybody have anything at the moment? Okay, thank you, Jay. Wendy, can you hear us?
Hello, everybody. Well, it's nice to be back. I saw some of you a couple of weeks ago when I was up there with the governor. For those of you who didn't meet me or aren't familiar with me, our firm under Joe Hayes has been representing Nome for the city of Nome for over 20 years. And so we've seen a lot of projects built over the last 20 years, and we feel very passionate about Nome, and especially this port, because I know it's been part of working through in Nome's capital projects and now huge at the federal level for many, many years. We have now, as thanks to the Jay and the federal authorization and the money, or the authorization, the deep draft Arctic port is now elevated at the state level. And the good news for us is the new governor's chief of staff named Randy Rivero is very, very bullish on this port. He was the one who called, and we've had several fairly lengthy discussions with Randy. He scheduled the governor. The governor came up, did a tour, was very impressed. I talked with him afterwards, and I think probably John and Joy and those will tell you we were quite surprised anybody at the meeting. The governor just cut straight to it. What do you need? didn't really ask us, listen to the presentation, sort of where do we need to go, what do we need, what you asked was ready to go. I think what we heard from that was the governor fully understands that a large portion of the phase one, and then that's a large portion of the cost, is associated with rock. And so he does see that as an opportunity because obviously the city of Nome will not have capacity to bond to the amount, so the state is going to have to provide in some way. So a couple of suggestions he made was that we, obviously his number one preference would be local partnership to definitely involve and see if this can't be worked out with local partners providing some of the match or some sort of partnership arrangement. Realizing that not all the money may be available or there may not be money available that way, he has suggested we meet with Ada and and he will be part of this, to try and come up with a creative way that Ada could play the role of a financing entity for the rock and look at a long-term repayment over years for that. Another option would be the Alaska Permanent Fund. And in 2018, the Permanent Fund Board passed a resolution that said they had to invest $200 million of their money into Alaska projects. To date, as of August, they've spent $88 million in Alaska projects. So I know that this will be something that at least the administration, the third floor, and different entities will be looking at. What's the appetite for the Alaska Permanent Fund? This is Alaska long-term investment project. And then also he has met several times the governor with an entity, Berkshire Hathaway, has come into Alaska and is very bullish on Alaska. You're going to hear some announcements come out from them in the next couple of months on projects they're looking at. And they are one financing entity that can and has the wherewithal to look long-term and look to provide the money and have it be not repaid straight away, that they have the wherewithal to carry financing long-term. So I think both of those two things are really, really good. Next year, the Gov will come out with a GO bond bill. It will be a GO bond bill that looks at bonding because the state, while we have a political and a PFD problem, I think we don't have a revenue bonding problem. We have tremendous capacity to bond. The problem comes down to the PFD. And just to give you an example, their third special session has to end at midnight tomorrow night. They must end it. And as of now, I've just heard the Senate cancel their floor session. They don't have agreement on anything. Nothing, unless it happens tonight and goes to the floor tomorrow, has to get through the House and Senate. Unlikely that they'll reach agreement before the deadline of midnight tomorrow night. What they are looking at, so you get some idea, is a 5% draw off the permanent fund, or a 5.25. Many of them are looking at 5%, and that would draw approximately $3 billion, 2.8 to 3 billion. And it's very simple. If you pay the full statutory dividend or the constitutionally mandated dividend amount, it would leave 546 million, to operate state government and to operate the state. So basically what they're trying to say is, let's try and bring that down to a stable amount of about $1,000, $1,100. We'll still have to dip into some savings, but not a lot. So the puzzle coming forward right now is $1,100 dividend for 4 years, pick up revenue, new revenue was $750 million in that 4-year period. And if that is done on the 5th year, we would go to a 50-50 split on the POMV. So dividends could go up if we get our financial house in order. That's the proposal going through right now. It does not have strong support, although it may have enough to get through. But that is the million-pound gorilla in the room, because the full dividend people want the full dividend and cut government. Obviously, that really hurts, especially areas like Nome, where we lose community assistance, we lose bond debt. We particularly used to lose PCE, that is no more because we won the court case on that. The PCE will be funded out of the PCE account. But schools, education, Norton Sounds money, a lot of state money that comes in, if we pay a full PFD and don't generate any new revenues, are subject to having to be cut. So I think what you're going to see on the PFD is somewhere around between $1,100 and $1,600 PFD for this year and the next few years, with the agreement that if we can implement taxes, and they're looking at a small bump on oil companies, they're looking at an education tax, obviously a mining tax, a slight increase, maybe a statewide sales tax, although that doesn't seem to have the vote. So I think what you'll see is some sort of taxes to pick up the $750 million, probably $1,100, $1,200, $1,300 PFD, and then a 50-50 split in 4 or 5 years. That seems to be what we're going for. We can get that out of the road this year. Everything, capital budget, everything opens up for us. But right now, nobody's passing anything until that issue's resolved. So I wish I could tell you that we could do a GO bond bill, we could get the port money. Let me say that Neil Foster and Donnie Olson have been awesome about pushing it. Neil, in his position as co-chairs, worked really hard, especially on the Arctic waste reception facility, the $10 million for that. He's still working on that really hard. And as far as the money for the match, the Senate Finance co-chairs committed on the floor in a public session to look to see how they can take care of the match for Nome. They're very, very bullish. Everybody is. But the problem is right now for us, nobody's willing to spend until we can solve this dividend. So every day I just hope they solve it so we can move on to other issues and start spending.
Sounds good, Wendy. I think backing up just a minute to our visit here last week with, and it was the day before the governor decided to appoint Ryan Anderson, Department of Transportation Regional Director from Fairbanks as the new commissioner. And that is going to be extremely helpful, I think, to us in our area. Ryan has a history of working very well with the smaller communities in this area, and Nome is definitely on his list of communities that he's worked with before and is committed to working with in the future. The other issue was the I guess this is a real dynamic type of thing. It's a jigsaw puzzle that's being put together and crafted. And the thing that makes it even more difficult in the process is that not all of the puzzle pieces have the pictures on the top of them yet. So when there are opportunities that come along the way, potentially just like this thing where this $250 million number popped up, and the stars seem to be aligned with everything so that it fits nicely into the project that we're attempting to do. And the other thing was the local control and foreign investment deal. There was a little bit of hair that raised on the back of the necks when there was some discussion of having foreign and Chinese folks looking around and being interested in doing something or being involved, and it was made very clear that this is a project that Nome and the state doesn't intend to lose control of. That as things move on, the setting of fees and the operation of the thing, needs to be something that's controlled locally.
And John, I think a good point. Sorry.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I think a good point is the governor recognized we asked the Corps with the governor there, other than the erosion project up at North Slope, and that is a huge sizable cost project, which has to be dealt with, but it's an erosion project. Other than that, would this project be the biggest project being undertaken by the Army Corps in Alaska right now? And the answer was definitely yes. And because the governor is so bullish on Alaska and economic development and accessing our resources, we have a really strong supporter in him, a very, very strong supporter. So I think John and council members, once the meetings with local partnerships and that are completed and we have options for moving forward and we can define them, this governor and this administration and wonderful Ryan Anderson, who's such a blessing in that position, they're not going to be afraid to step in and figure out how to do this. I feel very confident about that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments along that line?
I had a question when you get to the infrastructure bill, is how likely are we going to have that federal money come down through the state, through the DOT to help our roads are really deteriorated here and our staff has gone less than half, I think, over the last 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years. And the amount of money put into those roads is really diminished with the state budget as well. So what's the likelihood of that coming down from you, down through her and on to here?
That's a good question. I was going to give Wendy a chance to finish up and then I can jump into that. But I will just say right now, it's a pleasure to work with Wendy. We've got a great partnership and I feel like I don't have to pay too much attention to what's going on at the state level unless I just need to pick up the phone and compare notes with Wendy and vice versa. So we've got a really good collaborative effort between the state and the federal level. So on issues like what you've just raised, council member, how do we coordinate money flowing from DC through federal agencies to the state? I think we're going to have a good chance of going after that.
And I guess before I knew that Ryan was the commissioner, I had taken him on about an hour and a half drive around town while the governor was off talking to others. And we, looked at various things like Stedman and the issues up there and where our new museum is located and cultural center and, lamenting that, gee, it would be nice to have a boardwalk or a sidewalk and better access through this. And there are programs through DOT. We just need to go through and make our desires known. And so we'll be working with Glenn and then with Ryan too, so that we can, and then with the Planning Commission, to come up with a prioritization on streets, and they don't just have to be state streets. It can extend to city roads as well. So there's some more options out there,
And I think a short answer on road money, there's a large amount of money that's going to be pushed out through federal DOT and through surface transportation grant programs that'll be allocated to the states. The legislation and funding hasn't quite made its way through Congress yet, but I like how John characterized this as the city prioritizing what their projects are and what the needs are, and then matching them up with the federal and state level funding and going after it in a coordinated way. That's part of what I'll go through in a little bit more detail, but we're not quite there, just like the state's not quite there with its budget yet. Congress doesn't quite have its act together, but we're close, and that's why I wanted to come up and start talking a little more in detail with the city about what we can try to target and how to take advantage of a completely unique situation from my experience with this much money going into federal agencies. Often in the last 10 years, they've cried poor. It's like, we'd love to help you. We think that's a great project, but we're basically duct taping and, baling wire to keep ourselves together. And But now there's going to be so much money pushed through that they're going to have to find creative ways to spend it. And we want to be as opportunistic as any city or community in the state.
And just following up on that, Jay, the state is sitting on 112 million in broadband money from the last ARPA bill. They'll be getting a lot more if the infrastructure bill, once the infrastructure bill moves through. And the governor had reached out. They wanted John to be one of the members on the broadband task force. So I think that is very, very helpful for us for broadband into the region too. So a lot of that money is funneling through, and it is coming through to the state and it'll be divvied up based on recommendations like from DOT Northern Region, from the broadband task force, but we project an inordinate amount of money coming through the state.
All right, Wendy, well, thank you. You're more than welcome to stay on the line, Wendy, if you'd like. But if you need to.
I will, just for a while, I will.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, we're going to let Jay move on to other programs that are out there. And I guess just thinking when the fact that there are these pots of money, that there are several of these programs that also have tribal set-asides. And I think they will touch on that.
I will definitely. Perfect segue, thank you. So the Senate has passed what I'll keep referring to as the hard infrastructure bill. It's more traditionally oriented. It's why I focused on the port funding aspects. I'm going to go through some of the other major buckets that should be funded through this bill. The House has not yet voted on it. It's part of a complicated political deal that Speaker Pelosi is trying to hold together. She and the House leadership have committed to a vote on the hard infrastructure bill on September 27th. They are trying to work through the other infrastructure bill, the budget reconciliation bill, in parallel to that. It's not clear that the Senate is going to support the budget reconciliation package that comes out of the House. And it's so there's enough uncertainty that I can't promise when these pieces of legislation will pass. But the framework is there enough to talk in detail, starting with EPA. And I'll talk in a second about sewer and water. But what John said about tribal set-asides, some of the main themes for this administration and for the infrastructure bill, and particularly for the budget reconciliation bill, are efforts to push out funding to help rural, minority, and Native American and Alaska Native disadvantaged communities. So Nome, very, cut off from the road system, remote, has a lot of infrastructure challenges, has a significant Alaskan Native population, fits into a lot of the broader themes. So I think the eligibility and the prioritization to help Nome with some of these issues, I think will be relatively high. Some of you may be familiar with the state and tribal assistant grant programs through EPA. John, you probably worked with some of the STAG grants in the past. The hard infrastructure bill is putting $55 billion, $55 billion, that's 426 million nationally. So when I say that these programs are going to be flush with cash, I keep wanting to say 55 million. Smaller, more regional or Alaska focused, the Denali Commission, incredibly underfunded over the last couple of years. They're going to push out 75 million to the Denali Commission. And beyond that, another 20 million each year for 5 years. So I don't know how Nome and its needs in the surrounding region will fit into the Denali Commission priorities. I know when Senator Stevens first put that program together, it was targeting bulk fuel storage facilities that were at risk of going into marine or riverine environments. There's a new executive director of the Denali Commission, Garrett Boyle. Some of you may have met him when he came up as Senator Murkowski's legislative director. He just started less than 2 weeks ago. He's very familiar with rural Alaska. He's been to Nome a couple of times. And so I think we can work with the Denali Commission on that level. On the broadband, as Wendy mentioned, there's already a lot of money that's been pushed out to the state of Alaska. In the new hard infrastructure bill, nationally, there'll be broadband for equity access and deployment programs, 42 billion and change. So the change is 450 million. 100 million per state minimum, plus the territories. So even if you add up 50 states, Guam, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, there's a lot of money that's still going to be on the table. And so broadband is one of the areas that I think really we could look to targeting. Climate change has been another target and focus of this administration and the infrastructure bills. So I got a good tour of the utility system and some good background on some of the needs that the city is looking at. There's going to be federal funding, more funding through some of the programs that Senator Murkowski passed through her energy policy bill last year for geothermal, wind, solar, battery storage. So those are other good things to look at. And then also surface transportation. So I think it's going to be important for the city and for the city council and for the city manager to really think of your Christmas wish list, because this type of funding doesn't come along very often. It's not a sustainable amount of money to spend, but the stars are aligning, and I think we should pave what we can, put up broadband towers, refurbish the wind farm, and build a port, and as much else as we can get done while we can. For the budget reconciliation, that's going up another $2 trillion to $3.5 trillion, and the details are still really being written. Literally as we sit here, the House committees are moving first. Some of the committees, House Natural Resources Committee, House Sciences Committee, they've already gone through their individual markups, but the rest of the committees are supposed to have their drafts done in 2 days. And the speaker is desperately trying to put together this unwieldy package and get it voted out by the end of this month. The Senate has not publicly released any detailed framework of how they would spend $3.5 trillion, but some of you may have seen in the news, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, former governor of a state, relatively conservative state, he has said that he will not support more than $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion in spending in this bill. So there's a lot of politicking that's going to go on over the next couple of months. The Senate is split 50-50. So Joe Manchin and potentially Senator Sinema from New Mexico or from Arizona aren't going to support a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill, then Democrats, Majority Leader Schumer doesn't have enough votes to pass it. So there'll be some negotiations between now and when this gets across the finish line. If it passes the House and the Senate doesn't agree to that particular form, then it will go through a negotiating process. One of the challenges for Alaska, I talked at the beginning about how well our delegation has worked, supporting the state, works well together. Senator Murkowski was one of the 5 Republicans who helped really write the hard infrastructure bill. Budget reconciliation is a much more politically partisan-driven process. So it changes the rules of the Senate, so they only need to pass legislation by a 51 vote margin. And in this case, if they're 50-50, then the vice president comes in and casts the tie-breaking vote. So ordinarily in the Senate, you need to have 2/3 majority to shut down debate and procedurally move legislation forward. It's the way the Constitution and the way Senate rules sort of set up the balance of power between the House and the Senate. And reconciliation has already been used once this year. It's very, very rare to use it twice, but again, there's this huge push for this infrastructure spending. On top of that, what I would ordinarily be discussing with you at this time of year is the annual appropriations process. So we are very, very close to the end of the fiscal year 21. End of the fiscal year, September 30th. Congress has not passed a single fiscal year 22 appropriations bill. So ordinarily, that's where most of the money flows through and where all the fighting is. And there is some good news. There has been a softening in the opposition to earmarks. They don't call them earmarks anymore. I don't think we'll ever go quite back to the days of Senator Stevens, but they're starting to explore how to use what are called congressionally directed projects. So we may see some opportunities headed up this way to Nome, but I think it's going to take another Congress, another session before they really get their bearings on this, because it's still a little bit dicey politically. So what happens if they don't pass all the appropriations bills, and they will not by the end of this month? Then they need to pass a continuing resolution which temporarily funds the federal government at a flatline level. So it basically keeps the lights on. Depending on how things heat up with the budget reconciliation bill and with some other dynamics in Congress, there is a chance for another federal government shutdown. It's a lot of politicking. There'll be a lot of posturing if it happens. It's terribly inhumane to the congressional staff who are already having probably the worst times of their life. You know, they just took the fence down around the Capitol. Things started to get back to normal. They're putting it back up before this Friday out of an abundance of caution. It's a horrible place to work. If any of your kids, grandchildren, or relatives tell you that they want to go work on Capitol Hill, unless it's for the Alaska delegation, tell them that it's not a good idea. So I predict that there's going to be a short-term CR, short-term being probably until after Thanksgiving. So you'll get a lot of fighting. You'll buy yourself a little bit of time, and usually right before Christmas at the latest, they realize they have to do something before the end of the year because the next budget cycle has already started, and then they're in an election year, and everybody tries to get something done and clear the slate a little bit. As if September and this fall were not tough enough. So I mentioned already the House committees are supposed to be finishing drafting their provisions for the budget reconciliation, $3.5 trillion bill. September 27th, Speaker Pelosi committed to a floor vote on the $1.5 trillion hard infrastructure bill. September 30th, end of the fiscal year, government funding runs out. Surface transportation authorization expires on September 30th, so they're trying to reauthorize that through the hard infrastructure bill. National flood insurance authorization expires on September 30th. I think that's also in the hard infrastructure bill. October 1st, $150 billion in Treasury payments are due, including investments in military pension programs. And at some point in October or November, federal debt limit is expected to be reached. So the increasingly frequent congressional fight over raising the debt ceiling is also in this mix. And by the way, there's stuff going on in Afghanistan. So happy to answer some questions. I wish I had more details on specific amounts of funding that may be headed to the state and what we can go after, but that's what I'll be working with the city and city manager with and Joy to make sure we're as targeted and focused as we can be in the coming months.
It's not all doom and gloom.
A lot of money coming.
Questions? Yeah, anybody out there have any questions they would like to pose?
I got a question. Where's all this money coming from that he's trying to give to us? I mean, I'm not trying to look a gift horse in the mouth, but somebody's got to pay for that. What's going to happen?
It is, it's going to be like financing a very, very large house. And it's going to come to haunt us in the future. And a lot of politicians who raise their hands or step in front of a microphone and a TV camera and talk about that are countered with, we have crumbling infrastructure, we have wildfires. This particular president has really latched onto the climate crisis. And, you know, this is an oil-dependent state. And I know Nome, after Shell pulled out of the Chukchi exploration, not as directly involved in oil and gas exploration, but you know, diesel is still the primary fuel source here. So when I hear some of the projections as to how this money is going to be spent, how it ultimately will get paid back, you know, it's a troubling horizon.
And just because you don't take your fair share, somebody else
Well,
will.
I get it, but
To to quote Uncle Ted there on making sure that Alaska gets its fair share?
And there'll be some tax increases. They will be sold as just hitting the rich and balancing things with corporations that try to hide money overseas. But there are going to be a lot of energy taxes. There's going to be a lot of cost associated with a rural state like Alaska. So it's, I think that's why you take advantage of the funding while you can, do the repairs to, your core infrastructure here and put the community and the city in a better position to, ride the storm out going forward. Attract people living here and try to attract some opportunities in the future. But it's going to be a big bill at some point.
And I think, Jay, that this is all not going to be spent at once. This is programmed out over 8 to 10 years.
Some of the hard infrastructure bill is a 5-year spending window. The budget reconciliation window is a 10-year process. The federal agencies, some of the career staff that I talk to on a regular basis, I mean, they're scrambling. They're not writing these bills. They're just, in some cases, they're hearing about the funding levels, from me. And, they're going to have to be as creative as they possibly can in spending all this money, because the worst fear of a career federal official is that they get money from Congress and they don't spend it fast enough. And then Congress takes it back or reprograms it. But Glenn's right. It's not all going to be spent in 2022 or 2023. And I know in the past we've talked about shovel-ready projects and are you ready to go and how do you get yourself up to the top of the list. And I think the port project is a very good example of how hard the city has worked to go through the right authorization and Army Corps process. So projects that are ready to go could be prioritized and fast-tracked. But it doesn't mean that projects that are still in the works won't also have an opportunity to tap into some of this funding.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of money and a lot of money that people will want to spend relatively quickly, but there won't be enough engineers or construction companies or, these other folks out
Yeah, that's a very
to help
good point.
spend it on the timeline.
And the congressional delegation is great at fighting for the overall pot of money and fighting for the largest share of the pie to come back to Alaska. But when it comes to dividing it up among all the different communities and stakeholders in Alaska, then they're politicians and they've got to be very careful. I know that each of the members of the delegation believes in and supports how important the port is and understands some of the other challenges and needs in the community. But we'll have to be a little more creative in how we get their specific support at the state and at the federal level. So it's competition. It's like children trying to get their parents' attention.
You need a cracker back there to keep your stomach from rumbling, Scott?
Basically.
I have a question. Go ahead, Shirley. So I'm a career fisheries biologist, and today I spent hours listening to the state of the fisheries and the NOAA staff and things, and I know that the Russians have sent trawlers north again through the Bering Strait this year, and they're fishing on the Russian side, but they're not abiding by the moratorium on commercial fishing north of the line, and their fleet of transport vessels, both oil and gas and freight, is expanding manyfold, 20 times in the next 3 years, from 3 to 60 vessels. So we're seeing all this activity going through the strait, and the only military vessel showing its flag this year in Nome is the Japanese vessel out there right now. And it's to me, I'm just wondering, when's the U.S. Navy Coast Guard gonna show the flag in the Bering Sea, and it seems like they should be more active in the development of the port. I wondered if you'd heard any rumors to that the fact, is there anything you're aware of that the plans for the Navy in particular to,
Charlie, those are all good points. It's a little disconcerting. I've worked on fisheries issues for years. To hear that the Russians are violating the moratorium up above the circle. I hope that's something that's being brought to the attention of the State Department. But it really does get back to an enforcement issue, and if it's not being enforced by the U.S. and the Canadian Coast Guard, this is our region, then, the Russians are going to thumb their nose at us. I think you were here when the Secretary of the Navy came up to Nome, and he said down at the port, it's great to have submarines operating in the U.S. Arctic and the high Arctic, but what we need up here are big gray ships with even bigger American flags. Unfortunately, he's not the Secretary of the Navy anymore, but I think that the belief in a potential commitment to have operations up further north, I know Senator Sullivan continues to push for that with both the Navy and the Coast Guard. And I can't speak to some of the details or any of the conversations that are ongoing with them. I know that they're publicly reluctant to say too much because they're fearful that that will put them on the hook for helping to pay for building the port. But at the very least, it's like a field of dreams. If we build it, they'll come and they'll utilize it. But I agree, it would be nice to have something other than the Japanese training vessel up here to show the flag and show that this region is important to the U.S. I don't know how the Navy and the Coast Guard are responding to what happened last summer when the Russian military conducted surprise operations and disrupted the Pollock fleet down in the Bering Sea. I think that caught some folks' attention. I know that the Coast Guard can be opportunistic in their presence up here. When the Crystal Serenity came up, they had a couple of vessels shadow her to make sure that if something were to happen, that they had a presence up here. I know that the infrastructure above Dutch Harbor is non-existent. And going back to years when I previously worked in Senator Murkowski's office, it's looking at the map of Alaska, looking at very open areas where there is no shoreside marine infrastructure. So, this is, I hesitate to use the word critical, but it's very, very important. And that'll bring the Navy and the Coast Guard up here.
I know I'm preaching to the converted, but the largest fishery in U.S. waters is in the Bering Sea, and the Navy hasn't been in the Bering Sea in years. And the coasties try, but the freighters on the Russian side can outrun their cutter by several knots at just cruise speed, not redlining it, but just cruising. They can walk away from the Coast Guard. So it's kind of a, lots of talk, no action. I wish I knew how to that pot better.
About 20 years ago, the Denali Commission funneled a lot of federal money for, I think you mentioned it earlier, rural tank farms. There was a lot of concern about environmental problems associated with this. I don't know what the number was, but it was pretty substantial. I think it was about 20 years ago. Since that time, a lot of issues, whether it's deferred maintenance, whether it's climate change and settlements, and a lot of the rural Alaska tank farms are in tough shape. Do you anticipate or have you received any requests for sort of a secondary round of funding to address some of the issues that have occurred over the last 20 years with these rural tank farms? I know the Denali Commission put in place for a lot of these federally funded facilities that the local communities set aside a portion of funds generated from fuel sales towards dealing with this. Well, as you're probably aware, there's a very strong pressure in communities to keep fuel prices as low as possible. So I'm not sure that all of those communities have necessarily adhered to that and have established adequate maintenance reserves to do it. So just wondering if you have heard on that issue, or if there's any push to gain additional funding, because I think we're sort of facing another crisis. I just wonder your thoughts on that.
I haven't heard specific requests, but it doesn't surprise me. And I think that would still be in the potential scope of interest for what the Denali Commission could do with renewed funding levels. I think types of projects that you described could also be within the EPA STAG grant program. But it's a problem that needs to be addressed.
But that could be something potentially that would come out of this infrastructure. Bill, some of those funds could be channeled towards.
Yes, that's my belief. And I also know that this administration and my former boss, Senator Murkowski, would like to see more, alternative energy, pushed out into, rural areas to, lower energy costs, lower fuel costs. But I don't think there's any way to, completely separate most of the rural communities in Alaska from diesel entirely. It's just, it's not practical. So it's going to be a hybrid approach. And, again, an opportunity to take advantage of maybe some subsidized or federal money to put in renewable resources that can complement what is already in place and, start to minimize some of the fuel cost and the fuel delivery cost. I do really enjoy coming up to Nome, and it was nice to see such an active port environment. I mean, the gravel loading was just nonstop the whole weekend. You've got a Navy training vessel offshore. You've got a fuel barge. You've got 2 fuel ships. You've got a whole bunch of stuff going on up here. And it's just so clearly, sells what the project is. It's harder sometimes, not with the delegation offices, but with committee staff and some federal officials to explain. We had one call with somebody at the U.S. Department of Transportation within the Maritime Administration, and they do some grants. And their first question was, what's the rail expansion component of the port project? And that led to, trying to explain what it means to be not on the road system and the fact that there's no rail out here. And it's a challenge selling what reality is out here sometimes. So, and then you come all the way full circle and it's like, well, how are you getting up there? And I was like, well, they have twice daily 737 service. And now it blows their minds. Or you show them a picture of the hospital and you talk about how the port's been here for 100 years. And oh, by the way, despite PETA, Iditarod is still going. So it's an amazing community.
Yeah, I think, the money coming through these various programs potentially, but that doesn't stop our needs to interface with folks such as Garrett Denali and friends over at EPA and the like.
And, I'd echo that, John. What Joy has done with the Alaska District for the Army Corps of Engineers, the colonel, head of the Alaska District, does he rotate every 3 years? 2?
I think it's 3.
Two or 3. But there's a career staff, and there are people who've worked on projects all throughout the state. And, the better we can work with the career officials for EPA Region 10, Army Corps, Coast Guard, working with D-17. I know D-17 points at headquarters back in DC and they point at D-17. It's like, how come there's not a forward deployed, Coast Guard contingent here in the open season? And they're like, well, we don't have the resources. We're not being told by DC. And, DC says we're not getting the request from the district. So, we're still pushing that. And there, you'd see maybe a little bit more of a regular Coast Guard presence. So it's a long-term campaign, and as Wendy mentioned before, she and her firm have represented the city for 20 years. I hope I might be in that position as well.
Few of us will be in rocking chairs by that time. But
I have a 5-year-old. I'm never retiring.
Right.
But
How long have you been with the city?
Since 2016.
Most of this port project stuff.
First,
Especially the
Most,
most recent things.
Yeah, it
he's
was,
got his fingers in lots of pies. He can do lots of things. As long as he spends most of his time working for the port. Let's make that clear right off the bat.
No, back in, 5-6 years ago, we had previously had a federal lobbyist that dealt more with, utility issues and the like, and spun off for a bit on port, but we needed somebody that was, ports were their
Port
main
savvy.
thing, port savvy, and that's when we ended up with Jay, and
But he does get a list of your priorities
yes.
once a year.
Yes. And I haven't said much about COVID. It's awful. It has disrupted so many things. It's great to see that the community has been as resilient as it has. It has disrupted and prevented us from doing the annual meetings and visits in DC. I do think it's time for us to do more video. The delegation and staff are not traveling as much. I'm constantly encouraging them to get up to Nome, newer staff, turnover, and so that they can see things firsthand, talk to folks in the community when it's safe and appropriate to come up here. But, it's been a frustrating couple of years just trying to operate in DC with all the offices shut down. And I, like many of you, probably are sick and tired of Zoom. But that's it. Got to get people up here.
We're open. There's no restrictions to come in.
Good. Well, I appreciate the time with the council tonight and look forward to delivering more detailed information as we get things moved through Congress. And we'll work with you on prioritization and whatever else we can do to get things moving here. I do see that there is some street work that's needed, but there's progress being made right here. So,
Let's start.
all right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jay, appreciate it. Wendy, if you're still there, thank you. And,
Joy for her presentation.
oh, yeah, Joy?
This, what would you like to know, Mr. Mayor?
You want to maybe just run through this presentation that has been used most recently? It's printed in the packet under manager report at page 87.
Has everyone turned to the right page?
Being we still have 25 minutes here to
Yes.
occupy.
I can watch it on the screen.
Yeah.
Compliments.
It looks better on the screen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Than it does on paper? Yeah. As the mayor has indicated, this was the document that we shared with the state when the governor was in town on the 30th of August. This is a template of the PowerPoint that we share with quite a few folks. We've shown the state, there's been federal folks, agencies, potential funding partners. We've shared it with some of the delegation. Lots of different folks, military. And we try to tweak it a little bit every time that we show it to update the information as well as target it to the audience. Page two, actually, I like page one because it's got a nice little star that the mayor fixed. Somehow it got off over near Fairbanks and that wasn't gonna work. So we had to move it back to where it belonged. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad John has his computer skills.
And the name on the top there.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we have identified a forever tag for this project. Right up there, right up there. Alaska's Arctic Deep Draft Port at Nome. That's it. We're sold on it. If you think it's 3 words, there's a purpose.
Yeah,
Sorry,
if you
go
really
ahead.
want to go into shorthand, it can be A2, D2. We've moved those words around a couple of times, where Arctic fit and all that, but ultimately, I moved them that way and A2, D2, so.
You too, Dee. Or they're gonna know what generation we are, right?
So like Anchorage dubbed themselves the Alaska port, right?
Port of
Yeah,
Alaska.
The Port of Alaska.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
in Port of Anchorage, and only call it the Alaska.
Which reminds me, there's another comment at the end here when we forget about Port of
Or the
Alaska.
Arctic port.
We're the Arctic port.
Right.
They're the, anyway. No, they're a good partner, they are, they're good guys. So page 2, Mr. Slide Master, thank you. Although this table continues to grow, we actually did cut the gears off of it on the left that were before 2009. But it's nice to be able to show folks the north and southbound transits to the strait that continue to grow. Even with all the craziness that happened in 20 with COVID, there were still 550 combined transits. And that's an important thing to note because, like it says here at the bottom, 212% it's increased since 2009. That's crazy. It's obviously, it's not going the other way. It's only going to keep going. And we're like the last stop before you hit the strait, first stop before you come back, after you come back through it. And the one on the right, that's just a nice little colored graphic that gives you a real good visual of what these numbers mean. And of course, it's just one season because it's talking about all of the tugs working in the region to distribute freight, working up in that region to distribute freight. Some of them come right by us. A lot of them come through because they're transshipping cargo, fuel, dropping equipment, picking up gravel. We're really, I mean, you'd never hear me ringing a bell, but we're really, the place to go in our region to conduct maritime operations. It's not really a secret. Next slide, Mr. Slide Master, thank you. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but this slide has a lot of purpose in sharing with the federal side and the delegation and showing them, the targeted benefits of what the facility serves now and will expand upon after the expansion is built. But if you look at the ships, these are the ships that slipped through in January unescorted, right on by, pushing LNG, dragging it, carrying it. But, that's pretty close with no awareness. We knew when they were out there and then after they went by, but there was no escort or anything. So it's actually kind of scary. I completely agree, with Charlie. The Coast Guard and the Navy are way behind the curve. The Coast Guard does what it can with what it has. Congress needs to give them more money so they can do their job, but this particular job, we need the Navy for that. Next slide. This one reflects, we try to change these pictures up all the time when we add the years on, when we tag another year on, because every year it gets busier. This was a previous year for the rock piling, but it wasn't that far back. Now we've got gravel operations loading at not just the gravel dock, but the mid dock, and they've asked to use a city dock. No. We can't have a mud pit at the city dock or we'd be loading gravel at 3 docks. Obviously, we need more docks. And this aerial here on the bottom left gives you an idea. That's probably not one of AML's biggest loads, but it is a fairly good sized load with another one trying to offload at the inner cell. So it gives folks that aren't ever here to see this an idea of just how busy our little port in the middle of nowhere can get and how much of the regional effect actually impacts the facility. Next slide, sir. Some economic impacts here for this page is for the construction activity, for the jobs, the income, the secondary spending. I know some of you probably know what that is. The money everybody brings home has got to go through, I don't know how many changes before it hits its mark, but sometimes it can go through 5, 6 different levels between paying the fuel, paying the employees, they go home and pay their rent, and then they buy groceries. It just keeps wandering around town, this is, there's going to be a substantial impact, not just locally, but regionally and statewide and national. There's some bean counters that are, we actually find this useful. I know some folks it puts to sleep, but next slide. And then there's the post-construction activity benefits that we're still talking full-time employee jobs, secondary spending, as well as the income boost. I know people say now, if you want a job, you can have a job. There's jobs everywhere. Well, if you're in this region, if you really want a job, there's going to be, if you hit the right industry, you want to be a welder, you want to be a diver, there are going to be jobs during construction and after construction if you want to work in the maritime world. Also, it translates into town, obviously, where you can own an apartment building, you can own 6 of them and they'd probably all be full. Open another restaurant. I mean, it all translates down the chain of the additional economic activity that we're going to see. Next slide. This gives, again, the folks outside that aren't used to seeing these ships in town an idea of the kind of ships that we do see. Now, these gray hulls get people excited until you really study the flag. Obviously, it's not our flag, the Canadian flag, but it's a sad thing that the Canadian Navy, or Coast Guard ship, they call them, but the Navy, the Canadian gray hulls were able to dock at the Port of Nome before the U.S. one ever were. Isn't that sad? Now they can live that down on their own. North ships we see quite regularly, the Coast Guard on the bottom. And this happened on a farce, putting this 400-foot, 464 French cruise ship across 2 docks. They were working offshore because they thought they were too long, and the captain was a little nervous. I'm sorry, not the captain. The pilot was a little nervous about bringing him in. This trip, it happened that we had the captain, that the pilot had worked at a lot of different places. They had enough of a bump on the water that they couldn't run their older passengers on and off the little boats without making them sick. So we talked to the pilot. He's been in here a lot. Bill Gillespie, he's the one went to Vicksburg to help us pick the design for the expansion. He said, what do you guys think? Back in. Oh, why not? Draft wasn't the problem. It was the length. Backed him right in. He slipped it in there really nice. And now that's the way we do it when they come to town every time. It was really slick and not something that, you would have thought of, but it works like a charm. Next slide, sir. Okay, here's one of our special projects that we hope to be able to put into play. The Port Waste Reception Facility at Nome, what they're legally in IMO Polar Code, they're called Port Reception Facilities. Now, that's a small tag. Not a lot of people know that actually means one of these structures that operates under specific regulation. So we kind of stretch it out so you can understand what it is and give it more tags. But it's bringing to shore the black water, which is sewage, galley waste, which is regulated, like the cardboard and plastics and stuff, has to be incinerated because it comes off of a foreign vessel. And bilge water, if you can manage it, which is going to be a challenge for us just because of the volume. And gray water, which can just be mixed into the black water. And then obviously garbage. But we're working this one both at the federal and state level. Jay and Wendy have been coordinating. Wendy's got some effort going through with the legislature, with our reps and Senator Neil and Donnie, once they finish figuring out what they're doing with the PFD. We're hoping for something to come through this year, and Jay's working on it as well. He had a sub working for him for a while, and she put together all the legal aspects and environmental requirements to get us through to developing this. So we're hoping that between the two, maybe we can start with an incinerator to accept the regulated waste 2 years. And then by the time the facility is constructed, we're hoping we've got the entire system up and running. It's going to take some creativity to figure out how to work with the utilities on some things and other things we can't. So, but there's no facility in the region. Dutch Harbor doesn't have a facility. They have to go all the way to Kodiak to discharge, Kodiak and Anchorage, Seward, I think. But they wrote new legislation. Instead of every port had to have a reception facility for these large ships, they set it up so it could be a one facility in a region because of our situation. You know, all these little ports can't have one of these. So they've set it up to where we can actually meet the legislation by setting up one for the region. Pretty cool stuff. Next slide, sir. This is my favorite because it's got all the money on it. It's got all the dollars on it. The money we don't have yet. Without going into a lot of detail, right now we are looking at phase 1, which is, I don't know if you guys can see it. Brian, can you blow it up a little bit? Just a little? I should make that, thank you. I should make that bigger next time. You can see that one of the first columns is, almost time, is 75%. We'll just look at phase 1 to keep it easy. 250 million for the federal general navigation features, which are the breakwaters and the dredging. So that's the course tab on the left under the 75%, the 250 million. Over to the right, you'll see the general navigation features of the non-federal sponsor, which is the city at 83 million, which is 25%. So when you combine both of those, that's 333 million just for the breakwaters and dredging for phase 1, which is the extension of the causeway only. Remove the spur, take the extension out, 484 feet. Then the fourth column says 100% local service facilities for the non-federal sponsor, and those are docks, roads, utilities, dolphins. Then, so that's 64 million is 100% the city. And then you'll see the 83 million back where we were is the city. So when you combine both of those, you get all the way over in the black under the column G and F plus LSF. There's a total phase 1 for the city, 147 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but phase 1, 2, and 3, the total's 2.25. So for having 147, we're in better shape that they phased the project, as well as the feds are in better shape. I can tell you that these are still hypothetical numbers because they're just getting into the design phase. So there's a 35% contingency, and yes, that was a 3 and a 5. That's how the Army Corps does it. As they get through the phases and work through the design, they start fine-tuning the design, and they can adjust the numbers to exactly what they're encountering, and then they'll have like a 15% contingency for construction. So that's where, and right now they're anticipating of that phase 1 there to be about 679,000 tons of armor rock, A and B rock, and at their current WAG estimate, it's about 139,500 bucks, about 140 million. So, yeah, that's my favorite one, and as this thing gets closer, it's going to become more of my favorite, because right now I'm a little fatter than we like. But there are different opportunities to that funding, and the city is looking. We've got local partners talking about partnering for You know, there's, what do they call that, P3, there's preferential use agreements for the dock use, there's laydown space, there's local, them identifying a local service facility for priority use. There's quite a few options there, and then we have the state interest, and we're talking to them. There are federal grant opportunities, and then we have the Navy and the Coast Guard. So I know the numbers are scary, but there are a lot of elements that we're investigating and some that are just reaching out and knocking on the door. So we're looking hard into that. And when there's something known, it'll be shared, for sure. Next slide, Brian.
Just while we're still on this one,
Yes.
just quickly, the 250 number that we heard about earlier corresponds to the 250 number that's in the first blank there.
Yes.
The 642 in red is the projected totals. And this is with local facility?
Yes.
That's with everybody.
Yes. If you see the local service facilities are in the fourth column with the numbers in them. This, at the federal work over here, 75 core, 25% to city. This is the total of that. So we're paying 25% of this, 100% of this column, 100% local service facilities, total project number. And this column here is just adding up this 100% column, which gives us 64 on phase one, and then this other city column, NFS, 83. So phase one, we're at 147 in the black. If they're over here on the far right, this is a 10% over time that the Corps does. I don't know why they said if you have all your money, you can just give it all to us at once. But if you don't, we'll let you run 10% over time. Well, we should pay 10% and run the other stuff over time, like 3,000 years. But anyway, this is an additional component to this. So 180,
So.
but it's all hypothetical.
So 642 and 35% of it just happens to be 225, which doesn't tie at all to the 225 that's in the next column. But I mean, 642 and 35, that's a heck of a reduction in the overall cost of the project, if indeed their estimates are way off base.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure when the estimates will convert from these rough order numbers to more concrete numbers.
See, these are numbers from the feasibility study,
Yeah.
which was completed it was completed in December of 19, and the chief's report was signed in, wait a minute, I'm behind. Yeah, December 20. Chief's report was signed in May, so they're thinking they need at least 50% of the design done for phase one. They're only designing by phase. Before they would be able to actually ratchet phase one's numbers down to something a little more close. And they probably wouldn't take the 35% contingency off until they get more like 80%, getting closer to being ready to bid. And then they'll tighten up the contingency. But they plan to go to construction with at least a 15%, but it's a hell of a lot better than 35.
Well, I guess the other thing too is just this 139 or 140 number that's a little bit further down in the rock. That is all included in this 333, correct?
Yes.
Up above.
Oh, now you went back up. Okay, right there.
So you can see that, the rock component is one of the most, if not the most significant costs associated with it. And so, and that would be taken care of all in the first phase. So that would potentially be where a lot of the contingency is dropped. And so, again, the phases and the funding, all are this jigsaw.
Yes. And they asked that we please stress that. They're not hypotheticals, but they are very
Conservative.
conservative. They are, the line items are sort of inflated, for lack of a better word, for the unknowns. And then they add the 35% contingency. So the numbers that we see are just essentially inflated to cover the oops and the unknowns. I'll be happy when we actually know what it's gonna be. We've got, this is one of the, with every group that we present to, we have one of these pages at the end, how can this group help us to achieve the project? We discussed this with the state and the governor, and they were glad to have the additional detail they didn't have before, and they were anxious to hopefully be a part of the project and help the city achieve the goal. But of course, this was the first meeting. There's a lot of other things that will have to take place on many levels, a lot more discussions before we'll know what that is. And he split, but it's the final slide is just this graphic that we put up all the time that is just the cartoon of what's going to be built. Ooh, right on time. I can sit down.
All right, well, we can't go any further until we get Brian back, so, Brian is in the back. Any quick questions? Okay, we will take a couple minute break here.
Sign-in sheets over at the shop.
And then once we have
At the hospital. Not good for the whole day.
Get a flight, you could get a hotel room.
I say, we're just taking a couple minute break just for folks to stretch their legs, and then we'll be ready to go.
Sounds good.
I'm not 100% sure what he wants to know.
I have no idea either.
It's
Pretty much like last one.
So that was kind of.
Day after tomorrow.
I
was gonna say,
I'm sorry. Yeah, day after tomorrow. Wednesday, 15.
Usually
We went from 10 to 16.
Procedure this morning, just get around everything.
Oh.
Pretty well wiped out out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Woke up. You're not quite to that age yet, Adam?
Nope, not there yet.
Right?
So I'm not supposed to make it. Perfect.
Right, exactly. Well, it would, in 2 months.
I am really worried.
Jerry was yelling from the back the other day, hey! Right.
It just kind of was.
Or whether with the fall.
Ready to sit out of the splash zone.
Oh, yeah.
I could, if I could work
No,
it
no,
out.
no,
Sitting outside the splash zone today.
Oh.
Shouldn't.
8
Yeah.
hours, 12 hours with a hill. And then it just started to go. That's scary, you know. But, yeah, if I looked at that, I could.
Yeah, the water that we've been using, is sending service to that whole house.
Hey, Joy, when's the Kashima pulling out of here?
Where it is.
When's the Kashima pulling out of here,
It's pulling out of here,
time-wise?
Wednesday, I think, or the 14th.
Oh, okay.
Pulling out tomorrow, it's right today.
I didn't understand it.
Yeah, I was just asking when the Kashima was leaving.
Oh, tomorrow.
And the same guys that were here last year?
Yes.
Oh, no, I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry.
the Japanese boat.
Yes.
Coming back and forth with the Diane residents.
What's that?
Oh.
What's that?
Hey, we about ready, Brian?
Yep.
Okay. Time is 7:04. Call the regular meeting of the Nome Common Council for Monday, September 13th, 2021 to order. Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll to establish a quorum?
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Martinson.
Here.
Councilmember Reader.
Here.
Councilmember Topcock.
We need to,
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving on then to approval of agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda for Monday, September 13th, 2021.
Second.
Councilmember Reader, Councilmember Martinson. City Manager and I discussed this afternoon items on the agenda, and it's with his agreement and concurrence that item C, the resolution on the NPD accreditation, will be pulled from this to go to a work session first. And that the executive session will not, there will be no executive session tonight. Any other changes? Yes, sir. Thank you. Is there a motion to make those amendments?
Move to make, to drop, under new business C, resolution of, for the police department accreditation, and note that there will not be an executive session.
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Reader, Councilmember Martinson, a roll call please on the amendment.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Reader.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
yes.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Roll call please on the motion to approve as amended.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yeah.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Reader.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
Yes.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion as amended carries.
Thank you. Moving on to the approval of minutes. We have our August 23rd, 2021 regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
Move to approve the minutes for Monday, August 23rd, 2021.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Reader, Councilmember Martinson. If there are no noted additions, deletions, or corrections other than ministerial, roll call please on the adoption.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Reader.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
Yes.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on then to communications. The first item is at page 14, which is a letter of transmittal from the Chamber of Commerce that includes their resolution number 2021-02, supporting the permanent repeal of the City of Nome 2% seasonal sales tax increase during the months of May, June, July, and August. Page 17 is a copy of a letter of support for a broadband funding application, grant application that Nome Eskimo community has submitted. Page 19, a memo from the city clerk concerning untimely filing disposition for Justin Palacis on a disabled vet property tax exemption.
Make a motion to accept the application as timely filed for Mr. Politis.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Reeder, Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, so looks like he just purchased the property. I think the exemption language is related to who owns the property on January 1. Isn't that, am I incorrect or?
That's the language, I don't think the language specifically states owns, but that's when values stick is on January 1.
Right. But I mean,
So the acceptance of this, yeah.
I mean, the previous owner would have been liable for the tax,
Correct.
not the new owner.
First half.
So I'm just confused as to why.
Well, he'd be like, I think he's indicating that he's liable for the second half of the tax payment, and he's trying to get that.
For the,
Yep.
and then he can determine whether it's legal.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, roll call, please.
Councilmember Reeder,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. At page 20 is a letter from a Hunky Lee. A candidate for U.S. Senate in 2022. Talking about the Pebble Mine.
And
Not completely.
At the end.
Don't forget, they're gonna be running for Senate.
Right. Okay, you can read that at your leisure. It's available in the city clerk's office. And finally, under communications at page 21, is a copy of a flyer concerning the city of Nome's fall cleanup. September 20th through the 23rd. Another U-Haul, We Haul, or U-Haul to the Monofil, as well as a U-Haul, We Haul opportunity, and notice of the bounty on junk vehicles.
Mr. Mayor,
Sir.
I had a question for the city staff, the manager or city clerk regarding the letter from the chamber. And the city manager met with the chamber board recently to discuss this resolution that was put forth. And one of the questions I had was whether there was determination of whether the council could repeal the 2% seasonal sales tax if we so choose to do that, or what the mechanism was in order to move forward with a 2% reduction.
And I reached out to Brooks Chandler when I found out my emails were not going out, so I have to do that today. Or I just got back in town, as you well know, today. So that's a question that was asked. I mean, you as an elected body have been able to put a pause on it, and the question is, can you continue to put the pause on it, or does it have to be repealed by the voters? And that's the pretty much that's the question. You paused it last year for 2 months and you paused it this year for 2 months.
I guess besides that answer, we probably need to have some more information on the financial implications to the city. So I'd suggest this go off to a work session.
If I can suggest that, that work session should be a little more encompassing, as far as, all the revenue sources for the city, to discuss, the taxes and other revenue sources as a whole, and not just this one item, because everything's interrelated.
Sounds quite reasonable. Okay, thank you.
It was a lively discussion last Thursday.
All right. Good enough. We'll move on to citizens' comments. Are there members of the audience that wish to address the council this evening? If so, kindly come to the podium, state your name, limit your comments to 3 minutes if at all possible.
Well, I'm just going to follow because we had, and I appreciate you all having a little bit of a discussion about the resolution of the chamber. I'm Paul Costo, by the way. I forgot to sign in. Yeah, we would absolutely welcome to see a work session to be involved in, and I really appreciate Councilman Brown. I think he's spot on to looking at the issue globally, not just the 2% tax, because the business owners and the Chamber of Commerce believe that there's more revenue out there from taxes, and there's some missed economic opportunities for businesses in Nome that are having to collect the extra 2% versus people shopping. Some stuff on Amazon is still not taxed. There are other online vendors that are not taxed. We have some offshore fueling that happens that doesn't collect the sales tax. So we absolutely welcome a work session. I really appreciate you putting that forward. We had a great discussion with Glenn last Thursday. We really appreciate him taking the time when he was gone and calling in and spent the better part of an hour. So I really appreciate that time.
Okay, so that's a day you don't have to count as vacation.
You weren't that hard on him.
No, I'm afraid that's an everyday occurrence.
Most of y'all know me. My name's Bill Potter. I've got 3 lots down on the east side of town. And I just noticed how you so cavalierly passed on a possible legal thing to the city clerk. Hopefully you can do the same with me. What's happened is I've got 3 lots down on the east side of town that were incorrectly zoned open space against even city ordinances, which says open space is for public, i.e. city property. I've been trying to get that rezoned going on 2 years. And then this year I found out that the open space writing says it's for public lands. So I've been fighting again. I put in 2 applications to the Planning Commission and they've approved it. Now I get a letter saying that I need to do another survey. I'm tired of spending money on survey. This would be the 4th survey that's been done down in that area. So I leave Nome 1 November. Hopefully it'll be straightened out by then. If not, when I come back next May, your attorney can talk to my attorney. That's it.
Thank you. Are there others that would like to address the council?